I hope you all had some coffee and feel much better, less sleepier than before. So since morning you've been through, I guess, 6 sessions now. So your understanding and knowledge on Azure would have grown quite a bit. So let's make this session a bit more interactive. I probably much more questions, and since you all know so many things about BI and data now. Okay, so my topic, I'll be covering data ingestion and integration with Azure services. So let's get started. First of all, I want to thank all the sponsors and the team for organizing this event. So yeah, thanks to all of them. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, my name is Stefan Outskun. I'm a business intelligence consultant for Fortune, and you can follow me on the following Twitter, LinkedIn, and my blog. So just to go over what I'll be covering in this, some of it was covered quickly, and probably spend more time on the demo since we didn't do much demos today. It was mostly slides. Ingest data, store data, prep and transform data using Azure services. So yeah, the modern data warehouse, Google spoke about it, about the paradigm shift. Dinesh spoke about it, how on the architecture, and this was this reference came up quite a lot today. So as you can see, I won't go through much. What I'll be covering is 1 and 2 basically in the slide, so which is the ingestion, storing, and prep and training of data in Azure. There are a couple of services for certain areas in this reference architecture. They have just shown you what could be used. In certain areas, there are several other technologies which I'll be talking about. So number 1 is ingest data. So how would you ingest into Azure? Azure, their go-to solution is, before it was on-prem, it was SSIS, and now it is with Azure Data Factory. Data Factory came in it was version 1, and version 2 got released just last year, June, and which is 100% cloud-based UI. So you don't have to download any tools or clients to work with it. Of course, version 1 was based in using Visual Studio, similar to an SSIS approach, but was somewhat limited. Version 2 has Azure World. And inside Data Factory, you have what's known as runtimes, which actually does the heavy lifting of the processing. So there are 3 runtimes. The Azure hosted runtime will show you. And then you have your self-hosted runtime, and then the SSIS runtime, which again, a couple of previous sessions talked about. I won't be able to go into all of these in much detail. So yeah, so the SSIS runtime is there simply to lift and shift your existing on-premise implementations into Azure Data Factory. And the hostess runtime is for connecting to your on-prem data sources, since for the cloud to reach down into your on-prem, similar to what Power BI Gateway does. And you have your Azure runtime for processing data in the cloud. So like I said, Data Factory is 100% browser-based UI. It's based on a JSON code, so it gives you a easy to do UI, but you can see the code behind the JSON code, which historically with SSIS, if you know, was XML based, so it's quite difficult to integrate into a CI/CD pipeline. I know there's a separate track going on for DevOps and stuff. So Data Factory, what I see as the biggest thing or the easiest thing from SSIS is it's easy integration with CI/CD pipelines in Azure DevOps and now GitHub as well. So maybe I'll show you some of that later. Just a quick question. Anyone who's working with Azure Data Factory at the moment? Okay, so few of you. Others seen it, not seen it? Who? Anything? Just created a R&D account, done some work on it? Okay, just a few of you. So I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. Okay, so that is what Azure Data Factory does. If I just go back, yeah, so ingesting of your data into Blob storage in the case of a modern data warehouse. Sorry. So in the second step, you would store that data in some sort of storage. In the case of Azure, there are actually three offerings. There is Azure Blob Storage, which is actually the backbone of Azure. Everything in Azure is stored on Blob Storage, your VMs, your backups, even your cloud shell commands. If you see, it asks you for a Blob Storage before you get started. So Blob is there in all regions, and it is the main storage source for Azure. And what they came up with for as a specialized solution for big data analytics is you have Azure Data Lake Store. Initially, they came up with Gen 1, and recently, I think a couple of months. So if I go over some of the differences, Blob Storage, for example, is not integrated with Azure AD, whereas Azure Data Lake Store is integrated with, so your security is handled much differently. So in Blob Storage, you would have access keys and account keys, whereas in Data Lake, you would have simply connect through your Azure AD accounts. Yeah, and like I said, the Blob Storage is more of a general purpose storage. It's used for all Azure services. You could use it for data as well, but Microsoft recommends you use Data Lake if for more optimized solution. In certain cases, you might need to use Blob Storage because Data Lake is not available in all regions, so that's something to consider. And when it comes, like I said, availability and the geo-redundancy and backup, certain availability functions are not available in Azure Data Lake, so Blob Storage would be your option there. But for all other big data analytics solutions, you would go for Data Lake Store Gen 1 or Gen 2. So again, going back, so I just briefly told you what Data Factory is. We move your data into a data store, either Data Lake or Blob Storage, and then we would need to do transformations and preparation, cleansing of data. In this diagram, what they show is basically a Databricks Spark cluster, but there's actually more products in the Azure lineup for you to do that. So that, yeah, so Databricks. Databricks is the Microsoft recommended solution for big data analytics. It is what most of the other sessions you talked about it, so I guess you all have a good idea about what it does. It's a Spark-based cluster with some additional functionality built by the Databricks company on top of that. But also, Azure offers you these other services. There's Azure HD Insight clusters, which is 100% open source technology, so you have even vanilla Spark clusters on there. You have Kafka, Hadoop, Hive-based clusters. So 100% open source stack. If you want to go on, you have Azure HD Insight, which is the top right-hand logo there. And then in Data Factory as well, we have what's known as data factory mapping data flows, which again is a GUI-based, what do you say? Yeah, similar to SSIS for preparing and transforming data, but it's a GUI-based, but what it actually does is behind the scenes, it's creating a Spark cluster on Azure Databricks. So if you don't know code or you know a little bit of code, you can work with Azure Data Factory data flows, and it would create those Python or Scala scripts in the background and the clusters, and you don't have to worry about any of that. So it's, you can use that approach as well. And also, there's data lake analytics, which is not recommended at the moment. Microsoft started development on that and sort of stopped. So yeah, that approach is also there if you have been using it, but is not recommended. Yeah, again I'm on Data Factory. There are two versions of data flow. Mapping data flow is one which is in public preview actually at the moment. It's not GA. It should be out in a couple of months, I guess. And the new one, which has been in private preview of lately, is called Wrangling Data Flow, which is similar to Power Query if you have been using Power BI. It is just simple clicks, change data types, you know, similar to Power Query transformations in the cloud. If you have done any Power BI data flows, you'll be used to that as well. That's for an enterprise deployment of your ETL, ELT pipelines using that. So those are the services that would cover your ingestion, storing, and transformation. It was, yeah, just a brief, give you a brief idea. And I'm just going to get right into the demo. Probably spend more time there so that you could see exactly what's happening. So this is what I will be covering. I'll be copying some data from my local machine, relational data plus some files, loading it into Azure Data Lake and doing some transformations and then storing it in a Azure warehouse. So let me just get straight into it. So I'm in my Azure portal and I've opened up my resource group where I have my factory. So this is my Azure Data Factory and I will open that up. So this is what you get when you open up your Azure Data Factory for the first time. And this is where you would design your ELT, ETL pipelines. Before we jump into this, let me just show you what I'll be doing. So I have a relational database here on my machine. Sorry, this is my local server. I have a AdventureWorks database with a OLTP, it's a product table. I'm just going to use this table. So I'm going to extract this data, dump it as is without doing any transformation into the blob storage, and then combine it with some other data. That data would come from this Excel file. So let me just get straight into it. First, I would just create a pipeline. Let me just call it ingest product. And similar to SSIS, all your transformations and things that you could do on your toolbar on the left-hand side. So I just want to copy some data, so I'll just grab the copy action. I'll configure my source. I've created some of the data sets already to save some time, but let me just create one just to show you. So I need to create a data set to connect to my on-premise SQL server. So if I just search here, I have many versions of SQL Server. This SQL Server on-premise. So let me just create a SQL Server table. Okay, so link service. This is where I was talking about the Azure runtimes. So here, when I create a link service, it's your data source connection in SSIS. And you have your hosted runtime, which I've already installed. It's similar. If you use the Power BI gateway, it is more or less the same thing. So I've already installed that, and this is what I have here, hosted integration runtime, or if you select auto resolve runtime, it's the Azure runtime. So since I'm connecting to my on-premise SQL server, I need to select hosted runtime. Let me just enter my server details. And let me just add the credentials and test this. So any questions up to now, or you could take questions at the end? Anyone, questions? Nope. Okay. Created, so yeah. So let me just grab the product table. So I want to import the schema from my table. So I select import schema and finish. So I've configured my source. Next thing is my sink or destination, where I want to dump my data. So similarly, I would create a link service and a data set to my Blob store. And I've already created that. So let me just show you that. So DS stage product is that. Okay, so what this does is basically it would take my table, relational table, and would drop it as is in my Blob store. I think Dinesh was talking a little about schema on read and schema on write, right? So the thing with Blob store is it drops everything in text format. And so in your schema here, you would define, when you're reading that file is where you would define the schema. So since everything is in text file, since this is just where I'm dumping it, again, when I'm doing the transformation, I'll show you where I define the data types for that. So for now, let me just configure this real quick. I don't need any mappings, I'm just copying the data. And let me just run this. So while that runs, it's just going to copy the data to that. I'm going to switch this on, which is my data flow cluster. So it would take some time to come up. That's why I'm doing it now itself. So what that would do is, like I said, data flows, what it does is it creates a Spark cluster, and it's doing your transformations on that actually. So for it to spin up those Databricks clusters takes 1 to 2 minutes. So I just jumped ahead on that part to save some time. Okay, so as you can see, it succeeded. I have copied this file with 504 rows into Blob storage. And if I just open up my Blob storage here, in this you can see this is my data lake. Yeah, and my products.csv file is there. Actually, this one, let me just delete it quick. Actually, this is what I had created before. So, yeah. So same approach I would do to copy a file. I have my product categories in a CSV file here, which I want to map against my product. So I would again do a copy activity to create to copy that file as well to Blob storage. So have it here. Let me just quickly run this. So now I will have two files in my Blob storage, my product and my product category, which I want to combine. So that's the, so I've done the EL part. The next step would be the T. So Google spoke about the paradigm shift in the modern data warehouse. You have, it's not ETL, it's more of a ELT process. So I've extracted my data as is, and I'm going to, I just refreshed and my product category is there. I'm going to do some transformations on this using Azure Data Factory data flow. You could do the same thing in Databricks. You could do the same thing in HD Insight, all the other products that I spoke about. So let me create a data flow transformation. So under this, as you can see, it says preview. It's still in public preview. So let me create a data flow. So my source would be my data lake store, which I created the data set for before. So I'll select my DS product. Okay, this is important. Schema drift. The thing with working with files is it's quite easy for you to do changes in those sources. In a database, for you to add a column, you know, a DBA will probably ask you why you want it, and it will go through a whole cycle. But when it comes to unstructured data, you know, it's quite easy for you to add columns, remove columns, and do all sorts of changes. So that would probably break your standard ETL pipeline in SSIS if you have not handled it. But in Data Factory, you have what's known as allow schema drift. So in any of my files, say my product or my product category, if I have added or deleted a file, a column, as long as I have not used it in my downstream in my downstream transformations, it would allow that. So if I just simply tick allow schema drift, and in my next transformation, if I've used a select column, sorry, I need to select this. Yep. So it's not showing me the column still because my Spark cluster is still not up. As you can see here, you see it's, I clicked it about 30 seconds ago, it's still spinning up. So what this, for you to preview the data, you need your cluster up and running. So that's why it shows me 0 columns at the moment. So even though I have selected, it cannot preview the file. So while that starts, let me just go through the other steps. So like I said, yeah, I would use a select transformation as the next step to select which columns I would need from that file before I read it. So, yeah, it's still spinning up. Okay, finally it's up. Yeah. Okay, here I need to define format. Sorry, detect data type. So it would read that file and give me the schema. So it's the schema on read basically, since it's reading a CSV file. Just give it a second. Okay, so it's read my product file and it's given me these schemas. So these columns and the data types based on what it has sampled. I could go in and change this if needed or pick any other sample. So like I said, I'm moving on to the next part. Let me just select a few columns to make it easier. Turn off auto mapping. I'll be just using product name and a couple of columns. So let me just get rid of these. So I'll be just selecting product ID, product name, product number, say color, standard cross list price. Yeah, that should do. And yeah, I could alias the column. So in the product table, I just have name. So let me just rename it to product name. Okay, let me grab my second source, which is my product category. And let me just do one transformation on this. Say I do a derive column to add some column in there. Say I have list price and cost. So let me add margin in there. So just a simple expression similar to any other Excel function you could do. So let me just grab list price minus cost divided by cost would give me margin. Yep. And now let me just join my product with my product category. So I would select a join transformation. And let me do a left outer join. So it selected my left stream. Since it knows I've selected my product table. And I would just need to select my right stream, which is source 2, which has my product categories. So let me just select that, and I would map them on product. Oh, I forgot to select product category. So let me just add it in there. I need product category. Okay, now I should have my column. It's in there. Okay, so let me just show you the one that I have already built. So I have my product category mapped and joined together, left join, and I'm dumping it into a Azure database. Let me just show you that. So here I have my Azure SQL data warehouse, which has a product table. It is blank at the moment. Just select that. Yep, nothing in there. So let me run my transformation. So this, it should be okay. So your data flow executed from a pipeline. So you would create another new pipeline, which I have created, and I have a transform pipeline, and I would select, move and transform a data flow activity to run my data flow task. So I've selected my transform product data flow, and let me just run this quickly. So again, what this does is it's compiling this, what you see in UI into Spark, to run on a Spark cluster in Azure Databricks. So it's a, and if you want to see the JSON code, you can go into the code behind and JSON part as well. So let's see if we have, yes, we have some data in there. You can see the margin. Some of the categories are not there. It's not in the Excel file actually. If I scroll down, yeah, the categories are there and my margin column as well. So just a real quick idea of how you do some data ingestion and transformation in Azure, using Azure mostly. Yep, it's done. So that's it to cover my demo scenario. These are the references that I spoke about, the architecture, the comparison of Data Lake and Blob Store, and Azure Data Factory data flows documentation. And that's about it from me. Questions? Any questions? Yeah. Good question. We had this come up quite a lot. Yeah, you can handle it if you don't have surrogate keys actually. The problem is, what we found out is updating is not possible using Spark basically. So you will not be able to update columns. So in the case of a dimension, you cannot delete and insert records. So there are certain workarounds for that. You could, if you are working simply on business keys, then it's possible you can update. But if you are using primary key, there is a bit of a problem at the moment, and there are some workarounds through Databricks. Write code for that, and you could execute that through Databricks notebooks, not through data flows at the moment. Any other questions before I ask mine? That's it. Okay, so my question is, can you name 2 services on Azure that you would use to prep and transform data? There's a fan. Which part of Data Factory? Data Factory has 2 parts. So I mentioned Data Factory, and there's a specific part for transform. Anyone else? No. Not exactly. Yeah, data flow. Another one? Yeah. So I guess so. Data Factory, data flow is that part, and Databricks, and there's and Data Lake Analytics as well. So just fill up this. Yes. Yep. So that's it from me. Thank you. Thanks.